a real pleasure to be here. This is a great city, and it's interesting to see how Web Summit is impacting this city. One of my portfolio companies, a company called Salsify, just decided to relocate their European headquarters here to Lisbon. And that's pretty different. We used to see everybody going to Dublin before that, so it's nice to see the recognition of what the city has to bring. So I have a great topic to talk to you about this morning, the SaaS business model and metrics. And in case you're wondering why this is so important, I love this quote from Lord Kelvin. If you can't measure it, you cannot improve it. And clearly, all of us want to improve our SaaS businesses, so understanding metrics is important for that. But metrics also play another role, which is once you start regularly measuring a series of numbers, what you'll find is that your team will realize the importance of those numbers and start to work on improving them. So they can act as a very powerful way to align your entire management team and company around a direction you want to head in. But that also makes it really important that we understand which metrics to actually highlight and try to simplify those down to the smallest number possible. And that's what my goal today is, to help you understand which are the important metrics. And there is one warning I will give you, which is the metrics change depending on what stage you're at. And I don't have time today to explain that detail, but I will be in my following presentation at 12 o'clock on the Startup University talking a lot about these stages and how things change there. But let's also talk about another thing here, which is I have looked at many, many businesses over a lot of years, and I've never found a business that was as sensitive to small changes in key variables than a SaaS business is. And so that makes it really important to try to understand what these specific variables are that unlock growth for us. And again, that's my goal for you today. So one thing I think most of you probably already know is that if you are going to look at public SaaS companies and you wanted to compute valuation, if we look at valuation on the y-axis here, what we have to use to compute valuation is to look at a combination of two factors. What is the growth rate as a percentage, and what is the operating profit as a percentage of revenue, and add those two percentages together, and that will give us the x-axis, and that's the best predictor of profitability. So in other words, what this tells us is that you have to not only grow fast, but also be profitable. But alternatively, if you're growing less fast, you can get away with that by being much more profitable. So this is talked about often as the rule of 40, because you want your growth rate plus your profitability to be equal to 40%. So you could be growing at 50% and losing 10% per year, or you could be growing at 10% but making 30% profit, and both of them would be acceptable and hit the rule of 40 then. So that tells me something that I've been very focused on. Any of you who read my blog here will know that I talk a lot about these three words here. Your goal is to produce a repeatable, scalable, and profitable growth machine. And these are really, really easy words to say, but actually turn out to be very hard to achieve in practice. And they are very powerful words, though, because if you can figure out a way to grow your business in a way that's scalable, so you can do it as much as you want to, and it's also profitable, you have, in effect, defined and built a cash-generating machine where you can put in $1 of investment and a few years later get out many more dollars. So this is something that growth investors really love. Now, the key indicator that you've successfully managed to get repeatable and scalable growth is that you are able to grow your bookings. And here, it's important to recognize that I'm not talking about revenue or ARR, but your bookings reliably and consistently quarter after quarter. So if you grow your bookings, you don't grow your bookings, your business will still grow, but it will grow with a flat curve like that. And what we're looking for is an exponential growth curve, because you are successfully in charge of how to grow your bookings. You understand how to make your growth process scalable and how to scale it. So that brings us to the question of how do we measure bookings? It's really quite different in a SaaS business. And the right way to measure bookings is to look at net new ARR. And net new ARR is made up of three components. The ARR that you get from brand new customers, the expansion ARR that you get from your existing customers, and we subtract from that the revenue that we will lose from churned customers that we lost during the quarter. So these 4 components, or 3 components plus one summary total, are the key foundation metrics for running a SaaS business. If you're not tracking these reliably and regularly, then this is an important thing to take notice of. And this is the chart that I recommend that every founder use on a monthly basis to understand their business. So this graphs those 3 components plus the sum of them, which is the dark red line there. And again, remember, our goal is to see that dark red line growing, and we need to have the other components there to understand why it isn't growing or what is contributing to its growth and what we can do better there. And it's really important to have it as a time series, not just to look at a single point in time, because you want to look at whether it's growing or not growing. So any of you who read my blog know that one of the things that I really like to try and do is take complex things and simplify them. And today I'm going to try to simplify the whole SaaS business model down to one concept for you, which is you can think of a SaaS business as being a funnel. And if you run the whole business around this idea of a funnel, I think it really helps have everybody recognize what you're trying to do. In the SaaS world, we need to extend the funnel because it's super important that we retain customers to gain recurring revenue over a long period of time. So we're going to look at a funnel that includes the back end of onboarding and retaining and expanding customers as well. Now, the beautiful thing about funnels is that they're governed by really very, very simple math, and that's what helps to simplify my job today. The first piece of math is that to calculate bookings, we simply have to take the number of leads coming in the top of our funnel and multiply it by our conversion rate, and then that'll tell us how many deals close at the end of the funnel. And then if we multiply that by our average deal size, we have our bookings number. So that tells me we should be very focused on lead flow and conversion rate in the early days, and later on we can worry about deal size. I wouldn't worry about that too much in the very early days of your company. So let's take an example here of a very simple business. This is one where you drive your customers to the website and then you ask them to do a free trial and you hope to close them after that. So what I would recommend here is that the metrics you're looking at are the number of visitors coming to the top of your funnel, and then the number of people that are going into trials, and then the number of closed deals, and plot this as a time series. Again, super important to see, are you improving over time, because our goal is to show that we know how to control that growth rate there. And then on top of that, we really want to know how many visitors are converting to trials, our conversion percentage, and we need to track those over time as well and try to improve them, because clearly if we can convert more visitors to trials, that will really directly impact our bookings exactly in the proportion to which we make that change there. Now, a quick word about conversion percentages. They're not that easy to calculate. The way to do the calculation is you have to track a cohort, like the January group of people that you saw coming to your website, and watch them for several months, maybe as long as 5 months or so, to allow them to flow fully through the funnel to calculate conversion rates there. Once you've done that, you can get your overall conversion rate for your entire funnel. And this can also be very powerful because you can now look at that by lead source, and you can start to discover which lead sources provide you with a good return on investment where you can afford to spend more and plow more money into those lead sources there. So far, I described a funnel that required no salespeople. It was really just a marketing-driven funnel. But many times, in fact, really most times, there are going to be salespeople involved. And where salespeople are involved, we do run into a different problem here, which is a salesperson has both a ramp time but also a capacity limit. There's a limit to how many deals they can work on at any point in time. And as a result of that, our growth comes in discontinuous units, depends on the number of salespeople we have. If we don't hire enough salespeople, we will limit our growth because we won't have enough capacity to talk to our leads that are coming in there. So I want to introduce a second formula to you. And again, fortunately, it's a very simple formula. So when you have salespeople, your bookings equals how many salespeople do you have multiplied by the PPR, the productivity per rep. That's the average amount of business that each rep produces. And let's look at each of these in turn. So one of the biggest lessons I've learned is that every portfolio company I've dealt with has at least once, and normally most often twice, missed their sales numbers by failing to hire salespeople on time. And when you're a founder in the early days, you normally don't worry about missing your hiring timing because you're saving money by hiring people a little bit later. This is the one place where that really is important to not do, because you will miss your bookings plan if you don't hire salespeople on time. And that leads me to the importance of recruiting, and really would recommend to you that every one of you understand that recruiting is now one of the crucial skills you need to build to have a successful startup. And you need to bring that skill in-house and not rely on third-party outside recruiters for that. Looking at the second variable in that formula, productivity per rep, that's affected by the quality of people that you hire. And again, this goes back to why recruiting is so important. You need to have great talent coming into your organization. But it's also impacted by how good of a job you do on onboarding and training. And again, if you come to my 12 o'clock talk in Startup University, you will hear me talking a lot about how to create this training and onboarding and how important that is for founders to do. As you're spending so much on these salespeople, you need them to be productive. So I recommend monitoring productivity per rep, again with a time series graph to see how that changes. And to look under the details of how productivity per rep is evolving, I strongly recommend that you look at a chart like this where you have every salesperson you've ever hired and a green bar showing you whether they're above quota or red if they've gone below quota. And what we're looking to achieve here is in the far right-hand column where we have many green salespeople, and that tells us that our onboarding and our hiring is working well and we're successfully getting our salespeople productive. If it's not working well, then we need to fix either onboarding, training, or hiring to get our salespeople productive then. And another chart that may be helpful to you is to look at how many of your reps are above 75% of quota, and a rough goal here is 75% of them should be above that. And how many of your reps are above 100% of quota? And here a rough goal that's useful is 50% of them should be above 100%. You may not get there in the early days, but this is useful to have some targets to aim for, to be aware of them. So once we've got our funnel working, we do come to ask the question, is our funnel profitable? Because I mentioned the valuation of our company is driven by not just growth rate, but also by profitability. So to work this out, you need to use unit economics, where we look at CAC and LTV. CAC is the cost to acquire a customer, and LTV is the lifetime value of the customer. And our goal to have a viable business model is that our lifetime value needs to be significantly greater than the cost to acquire the customer. So let's start by looking at the lifetime value of the customer. And this is obviously dependent on how long we can keep our customer, the lifetime. And the formula to compute customer lifetime is simply 1 divided by the churn rate, the customer churn rate. So that tells us churn is extremely important as a variable that drives our profitability and therefore our company valuation. But churn is not simple. There are 2 forms of churn, and I want to show you what the difference between the 2 of them is: customer churn and dollar churn. So I'd like you to imagine a simple story here where we start the year with 2 customers. One is doing $1,000 a month, and the other one is doing $5,000 a month. If we lose the first customer, we had 50% customer churn, but we only had 17% dollar churn, so not too bad on the dollar churn. But if it goes the other way around and we lose the second customer, we've lost 83% of our dollars, so we need to track both of these things separately. But something very cool can happen, which is instead of just losing customer 1, if we were successfully able to grow customer 2 from 5K to 7K, we would actually have minus 16% dollar churn. And this is negative churn, and it is a very, very important concept for a SaaS business. So again, to repeat, what is negative churn? It happens when the expansion revenue from your existing customers exceeds the revenue that you lost from your churned customers, and it is very powerful. Now, some of you might know I was on the board of HubSpot in early days. At HubSpot, we started with 1 product at 1 price point, it was $6,000 per year, $500 a month. And we had no way to get any expansion revenue because there was nothing else to sell them after they'd bought the initial product. So a key lesson we had to learn was that to get expansion revenue, we needed to have variable pricing axes. And you can get variable pricing axes by introducing different editions of your product or by charging for users, or as in HubSpot's case, charging for some other metric like the number of leads that they were storing that was a better equator to how much value the software was providing to the customers. So that was a good lesson to learn there. Again, I wouldn't panic if you don't have variable pricing if you're an early stage startup. It's a secondary thing that comes along later on once you've got your business up and running here. But I believe that negative churn is crucial for success. And to illustrate that, I'd like to talk about this company here that has revenue loss of 2.5% monthly. And you can see that if there are 10 million of ARR, in order to just get back to 10 million in the next year, they will have to do another 3 million, have to find 3 million just to replace the business that they're going to lose through churn. Well, 3 million's not that big of a deal. We can easily book 3 million somewhere along. But if you take it a little bit further forward and you look at that same business when they hit 100 million, now they have to replace 30 million just to stand still, just to stay the same size that they were before. And that turns out to be a very big problem. And I was very friendly with Gail Goodman of Constant Contact, and this was the exact problem that they ran into. They never were able to get to negative churn, and as a result, their business just struggled to grow and grow. So negative churn is the answer to how you get a successful long-term SaaS business there. Now, the one other thing I'll show you here is if you look at a particular simple model that I created and you track what happens if you have 2.5% churn or 2.5% negative churn. After 40 months, the difference is on the right-hand side, we have 400K in ARR versus only 150K on the left-hand side. So a very big difference in how fast your business will grow with negative churn. Now, there's another reason why we need SaaS unit economics, and that is because all other businesses have been measured by a P&L and a balance sheet, traditional GAAP accounting metrics. But these don't work for SaaS. And the reason why they don't work is because we have this strange phenomenon where we lose a lot of money in the early days acquiring our customers, but we don't make that money back very quickly. We make it back over a period of time. So we have a negative cash flow for a long period of time with each customer we add. And so that's one customer. What happens if we add many customers? Well, let's show you what happens if we add 5 customers a month. This is just looking at sales and marketing expense. We have a cash flow trough. I call this the SaaS cash flow trough. And it's something that is very important for investors and board members to understand because all SaaS businesses that are succeeding will lose a lot of money. And that's because of this phenomenon here. And what happens as well is that in this model that I showed here, the faster you grow, the deeper your cash flow trough gets. So this is kind of interesting. And one of the board members at HubSpot was the CFO at NetSuite, Ron Gill, and he gave me this quote for a blog post that I did. The thing that surprises many investors and boards of directors about the SaaS model is that even with perfect execution, the acceleration of growth will often be accompanied by a squeeze in profitability and cash flow. And so they saw this constant going back into negative cash flow as they just started to re-accelerate their growth there. And I used to run into this problem with my partners when I would come in and talk about the fact that HubSpot was doing really well, and they would say, why is it losing so much money? And it kept getting worse and worse and worse, and I had to explain it to them with these graphs here. But it does lead you to an important question. So if you're losing money at an increasing rate, how do you know that you have a business that will turn the corner and be a successful business? And the answer is that about 10 years ago, I wrote a blog post where I came up with these guesses as guidelines, which is that your lifetime value should be at least more than 3 times CAC, and you should be able to recover the CAC in under 12 to 18 months or so. They were very rough guidelines, and I guessed at them, but 10 years later, it turns out that they've been very much time-tested and proven, and I think they're really strong key guidelines as to help you find out, are you actually going to turn the corner and become profitable then? So one other thing that's very powerful about unit economics is that you can actually use them to help you understand your customer segment. So here we have HubSpot again. On the left-hand side, the very small business segment only has a 1.5 times LTV to CAC ratio. But the VAR channel that we were using to sell to the very small business actually had a 5-to-1 LTV to CAC. So this helps us recognize that we had a very unprofitable customer segment, But at the same time, we also had 12 reps assigned to the very small business, but only 4 reps assigned to the VARs. So obviously, 12 months later, we changed that completely. We had only now 2 reps left selling to VSB and 25 reps assigned to selling to the VAR channel. So that helps you understand where and how to drive the business for you. So last thing to recognize here is there's another kind of unit economics that can be helpful, and that is for the salesperson. So if you pay your salespeople about $100K on target, my recommendation is that you set the quota about 4 to 6 times that to be able to get very profitable salespeople. And one last thing I want to talk about here is in my model, I studied the impact of doing upfront annual payments and discovered that this has a huge impact on your cash flow, not your P&L because it doesn't change that. But here's my model that I ran. It shows that in one case you ended up with $3.5 million in cash, and in the other case you ended up with $38 million in cash, and you avoided the whole cash flow trough. So if you're able to, this is one of the most powerful variables there. So in summary here, my entire thing was to try to simplify the SaaS down to recognizing that it's just a funnel, and if you look at optimizing that funnel, you have a great way to create the metrics that you want. So bookings we care about, using the formula that I talked about. We care about the bottom of the funnel, customer happiness, retention, and churn and negative churn. And we care about profitability through unit economics and gross margin. And then lastly, as I showed you, for your cash flow, collecting cash up front is a very key metric. Now, there's clearly a lot more than this, but I only had 20 minutes to talk to you today, so I had to cut things down as much as possible. If any of you are interested in looking further here, I would recommend going to my blog. And one very last thing that might be interesting to you is at 12 o'clock, I'm talking over on the Startup University stage about 9 stages to get to a repeatable, scalable, and profitable growth model. And I will talk about how it's crucial it is to understand each of these stages and why you cannot rush ahead and how much damage you do by going ahead there. So hopefully I'll see some of you with that. But otherwise, thank you very much for your time and for listening to me. And it's been a pleasure talking to you.